Good morning, everybody. How you doing today? Let me just kill the overlays. Perfect. All right. So number 2 in the road to reinvent. Not 75 days left. I forgot to update that. We are down to 71 days left. Yeah, I think 71 days left. Let's jump that back up. Let's make sure we make that quick edit. 71 days. Got to stay accurate here. 71 days. 71 days left to reinvent. I promised in the kickoff video a couple days ago that we were going to talk about different things leading up to reinvent, because I think there's this misperception around cloud where it's like, okay, you're going to build technology in the cloud, so we've got teams, we're going to build all of this crazy stuff. I think there's a lot of really quick, easy wins that can just help you as an individual. Just some really basic, simple stuff. So we are here on LinkedIn Live. We will be posting this to YouTube afterwards, pushing it out maybe to Periscope, we'll see, but at least YouTube after the fact. So for anything interactive here, I am actively monitoring the comments. So just gonna type in here, just ask. Have a question, just ask. LinkedIn's a little bit delayed between the stream, which is expected, which is great. So I will address it, but it's about a 15-second lag compared to when I say it, when it shows up on LinkedIn. But that's where we're interacting primarily, here is on LinkedIn. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to go through AWS Lambda. Reason being, I was at an event yesterday, Cloud Sec in Toronto, so hosted by IT World Canada, sponsored by Trend Micro, which is my full-time employer, just as full disclosure. But I gave a talk, a modified version of a talk that I've been giving at a number of AWS events around the world. And that was taking some advanced security concepts and automating them in a really simple way. And of course, the core key to that is AWS Lambda. It's a critical service, and it's a really important one, but I think people kind of get intimidated maybe by Lambda. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump in and we're going to create some code in Lambda, and you're going to see just really how easy it is, and hopefully that will kind of knock down the intimidation factor. So what we're going to do right now is it's 4 past the hour. We're going to give ourselves a timer. We're going to pop that timer up here on the stream. I'm going to move that down in the corner. We're going to give ourselves about 30 minutes to learn something in Lambda. So if you can bear with me for 30 minutes, I'm going to teach you some basics of Lambda. Now, one of the things that I'm going to have to do just based on the logistics of the stream is I may have to pause to look at commentary, but I think generally we're good. Stream health is good. The LinkedIn channel comments are up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip to my screen because the clock is already ticking. Let me go here and share out. I'm going to make sure that we are just sharing out Google. Perfect. All right, so let's make this a little wider. And there we go. So I am currently logged into an AWS account. This is the account I use for teaching. I refresh it regularly. So this is an account that has never done anything in Lambda before. So you can see the AWS Lambda page here, and the tagline is very simple. Lets you run code without thinking about servers. That's a really, really good thing. I'm going to make this timer a little bit off in the corner there so you can still kind of see me. So if you have questions as we go through this, fire them up here on LinkedIn. Happy to answer them as we go, but basically we're going to do a quick walkthrough here. So Lambda, the idea is that you have code and that needs to run somewhere. In a traditional environment, what you would do is stand up a server, or maybe in modern days, you stand up a container that has all your dependencies that runs the code for you. Lambda takes that away. It abstracts that away so that you just have your code and AWS worries about running it in the background. What's actually happening in the background? Your code executes in a unique container and then shuts down, but you don't need to worry about that. You just have code that is triggered by something. So we are going to start by clicking the big orange create a function button. Okay. Augusto, which presentation, the notes from the presentation I gave yesterday in CloudSec, or what we're talking about today? Let me know in the comments as I continue along. So first up right now, what happens is you're asked to create a function, and AWS tries to make this as simple as possible. They allow you to start from scratch, which is what we're going to do because I want to show you the different components. You can use a blueprint, which gives you some common sample code for common use cases. This is really, really useful. I'll show you what that looks like when you switch over. It starts to give you some options like CloudFront, modify a response header for your content delivery network, process streams in Dynamo, config rule change, right? So common AWS scenarios already have blueprints set up. Extremely handy. For browse the serverless app repository, or SAR, because everything gets an acronym, why not? Serverless app repository is a community-based toolkit that essentially where people have, and yes, Augusto, I'll send you the link for yesterday's note presentation. Also giving it at the AWS Summit in Toronto again, and potentially at reInvent. But yeah, I'll send you that, and I'll write something up on today's fantastic feedback. So back to the serverless app repository. Basically, these are, instead of just blueprints of one function, they're a collection of serverless pieces to help you build an application and really jumpstarts. They're foundational architectures. Once you get more familiar with this stuff, browse through the serverless app repository. There is some gold in there. But what we are going for here is authoring from scratch. Why not? We got 26 minutes left. Let's do some coding right from scratch. And I want to show you how easy this is, even if you're not used to writing code. Caveat, I'm going to make some mistakes. That's the whole idea of these live streams. That's the whole core goal of helping you guys, walking through this together as a team. I'm going to stumble. Hopefully we don't fall, but just bear with me. Okay, so start from scratch. We want a function. What we're going to call our function is road to reInvent sample 1. Super exciting. Normally this would be a lot more descriptive, but I'm not quite sure what we're going to build yet. So just quite easy. Give it a function name. Now your critical decision is the runtime. What type of code are you going to be writing? By default, Node.js, but you can see here Go, .NET, Java, Python, Ruby, a bunch of stuff are supported, including custom runtimes. You can build your own out. So some people have done some really funny legacy languages, some useful niche stuff. But what we're going to be doing today is picking Python 3.7. I find this is a great way to ease people in. Lots of great libraries that support it. Lots of utility, and the syntax is really simple for people who are just dipping their toe in the water of writing code. All right, so Lambda, now the next section that it's asking for is around permissions. There are two sets of permissions when it comes to Lambda. There are the admin role and the execution role. I know, we got to get a little deep, a little technical here. The admin role is simply who can access the Lambda function as a thing within AWS. So who can do what we're about to do. That's the admin role. The execution role is what the Lambda function itself has as permissions. So by default, it has no permissions. You have to give it some permissions. So if you are writing a function that accesses an S3 bucket, you need to give it those permissions for S3. If you're writing something that accesses CloudWatch, you need to give it CloudWatch permissions. All of those permissions in the execution role are the permissions assigned when the Lambda executes repeatedly. So if you are accessing an AWS service within your a Lambda function, you want to make sure that you have the proper permissions here. What we're going to do is create a basic Lambda permissions role. This is the default role suggested by AWS. It's actually quite good. It doesn't give a ton of permissions out, and it gives us something to work forward through, because we're just going to look at the concept first, and then we're going to get a little bit deeper depending on time, because we only have, no, wait a minute. No, there we go. There we go. I'm pointing to the right thing. 24 minutes left. So let's see if we can get here. Create the default role with Lambda, or create new role with basic Lambda permissions. We're going to click that orange create function button, and that's just going to take a second. While it's doing, I'm just going to check on the comments on the stream. Health looks good. We are sitting there because I don't want to conk out like I did last time on you folks. So now we flip back, and you'll see we get a green banner at the top if our function has been successfully created, and we can run it in test right away. There's a number of buttons up at the top. So we see we have our role name, road to reInvent sample 1. We can throttle it. We can add a whole bunch of extra functions. Important thing to note, but not to understand yet, is if you are ever asked for your function ARN, or Amazon resource name, it's right here in the top right corner. We'll cover that some other time, but it's there front and center. I like this default page because it shows you the concept of Lambda. What I mean by that is that we have our function. We just created road to reInvent sample 1. something needs to trigger that function, like, hey, start the function, and then that function has a bunch of outputs. You can see right now in the middle of our diagram here, we have road to reinvent sample with the Lambda icon, and we have layers underneath it. Lambda layers are other prepared pieces of code or binaries that get attached to your function, so you don't have to repeat yourself all the time. So if you have a set number of dependencies, you can put them in those layers, or you can borrow other people's layers so that you don't always have to rebuild. Kind of handy to expand your Lambdas. Think of them as sort of clickable extensions. And then if we follow this map, you bear with me as I drag my mouse cursor, which is always a horrible way to highlight things to people, but we don't have much choice here. By default, it writes out to Amazon CloudWatch logs. So this says when our function is executed, if we ever write to standard out or you just print to a console in the language, it will go to CloudWatch logs. So that basic Lambda execution role gave us ability to write to, to create a log stream and write to a log stream. So very, very simple. But what we're missing is over on this side, we're missing a trigger. And again, we're taking comments here on LinkedIn. If you have any questions, just ask. I can see it while I'm in the main browser window. So if you need clarification or want me to go somewhere else with this, let me know. So now we have the ability to sort of add this trigger. You can view the permissions. That's the key in the top corner if you were wondering. But we want to set some sort of trigger. If we click the Add Trigger button, you're going to see we can select a trigger. Now, there's a whole bunch of default options here, and this is really great, and it starts to give you an idea of the first steps you can take with Lambda, and that's really gluing stuff together. So we can start with API Gateway. If you're building a serverless application, API Gateway is how you get an HTTP or HTTPS endpoint to trigger a Lambda. So if somebody hits this URL, your Lambda will fire. Very, very useful. AWS IoT, load balancers, CloudWatch events, code commit, DynamoDB, all these sort of standard AWS triggers can be initiate your Lambda function, which is great. So you don't have to have a trigger, by the way. You can execute this thing manually, but this is one of the key parts of it, right? And you can also take some key partners. So you'll notice it's powered by Amazon Event Bridge. That is another service that we'll tackle on another day, but basically it helps connect SaaS services to things like Lambda. And you can see Datadog, OneLogin, PagerDuty, SignalFX, Sugar, all these partners have already made easy ones. So if you're using one of these services and want to take an action on an event, this is how you do it. We're going to add something real quick, and I think we'll get rid of it because I don't know if it highlights the example. But if we hit S3, you'll see then it's going to ask me, okay, well, what bucket and then what event type? So all object create events. So anytime an object is created, I want this to trigger. Well, maybe I only want it when an object is copied or when something is permanently deleted. You can check the parameters around when this trigger goes. I think that's pretty straightforward. Most of the time for S3, what you're going to say is all object create events. So anytime anyone creates an object in this S3 bucket, I want this Lambda to be invoked. Makes sense, right? That's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. You can use this to verify objects. You can use this to, a lot of time to do thumbnail conversion off images is a popular example, convert videos, that kind of stuff, right? This is how you set up a trigger. And if we, at the bottom, you see Lambda will add the necessary permissions for you. That is a very, very nice feature. It will add them to the role that's being used to give you this trigger work. So if we hit, to make this trigger work, so if we hit the orange add button, you'll see now that we have a trigger in our diagram. In this case, it's S3, triggers road to reinvent sample, which then writes out to Amazon CloudWatch logs. Does that make sense for everybody? Let me know in the LinkedIn comments. I'd love to hear your feedback as we're going through this. We've got a number of folks in the stream. You're out there listening. Let me know if this is hitting the nose for you, right? There's a basic intro to AWS Lambda, which is the key, because I think that's sort of the techniques or the tone we're gonna take moving forward into Road to Reinvent here is basic introduction to stuff to help you get better, right? So we're gonna remove this trigger right now because we don't really need it. Okay, we don't need it yet. We're going to keep things really, really simple. You'll see that it actually takes a second. It's pending deletion. So we're going to click save, and that should then fire off that trigger. So now it's removed. So we can actually invoke this code right now. We can hit test. Test is going to do absolutely nothing because our code does nothing. If we hit test, you're going to see it's going to ask, okay, is there a test event that you want to send to this Lambda. If you click on the templates, you'll see there's a bunch of default AWS events that happen. So if we scroll up here to like an S3 put, that's going to give you the sample JSON document that's sent to your code anytime S3 puts an object. So really, really great to start coding here. If we wanted to say every time that there is an S3 object, we want the following thing triggered, we can do that. So you know what? S3 is a really simple example. Let's do this. Let's use an S3 put. We're going to give this event a name, sample S3 put event. Okay, and we are then going to create. So you'll see in here, before we create this event, you're going to see that we get in the document, we get records. Records has a square bracket, which means it's an array. It's a list of 0 or more of the following, and that is another subdocument that contains the event version, the region, the event name, so what is happening in S3, the parameters around it, so who made that request, the response. Sure, most of the stuff you're just going to ignore. What you want to know here is, though, in S3, there was a bucket. The bucket name was example bucket. In our case, when we put this into production, this will be the name of the actual bucket. And the key was test key. So somebody saved a file in the directory test, named file named key in the directory test an example bucket. That's what this event is saying. That's under a subdocument S3. So if we create this and run that test, what you're going to see is we have an execution result, which has succeeded. Yay! Our code that does nothing did nothing. We have succeeded in life. Yeah, it's kind of handy though, right? So what we see if we click the details, this is going to give us our return value from the function. In this case, status 200, which is the standard for HTTP success. And the body is hello from Lambda. So we have run a hello world. If you scroll lower, you will see the actual log entries that say request ID, end request, report, and so on. So our test has been successful. And Augusto has a fantastic question. Can you add, update, or remove the trigger on the fly? You can, but that's between executions. So you can change triggers at any time you want. So you saw we added a trigger and then removed a trigger. Executions will happen as it's going. Executions happened on the last saved version. So while we were adding the trigger, nothing was triggering the event. When we added it, there was the potential for things to be triggered. So there is nothing that requires you to set up triggers when you create your code. You can change it on the fly. And that's actually a great tool because your code can be modular, and then as long as it accepts the input from the trigger. So we're going to write some code that doesn't need a trigger. We're going to trigger it manually, and then we're going to set up that trigger. So we have this option now of, if we scroll down, and hopefully, Augusto, that answers your question. If it doesn't, let me know in the comments, and I'll go deeper here. So if you scroll down here, you'll see our function code. Okay. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Lambda or with Python, we're going to dive into what this means in a second. But I want to say something really important about this frame. You'll notice function code, and I don't know why I'm pointing at my screen, like you can see me pointing. So I'll use the mouse cursor. And we got 15 minutes left. We're laughing for time here, guys. So what we've got is in function code, we've got code entry type, so we can edit it in line. Our runtime's Python, and the handler is lambda function.lambda handler. Now you notice lambda function is the name of our file. Lambda handler is the name of what's called a function. So def is the keyword in Lambda to define a new function. This line of code on line 3 defines a function called lambda handler. In the box for AWS Lambda, if your handler is not pointing to the right place, your code will not work. This is literally the line, the handler is the line that says this is where Lambda is going to start your code. Okay? It starts your code passing two objects, an event and context. The event is what we saw in the test event, the S3 put request. Context gives you information about what's happening in Lambda itself. We're not going to get there now. But what also is very important to understand is this iframe window we're looking at, again, don't know why I'm making the sign, is actually an import from Code 9, which is an AWS service that stands up a development environment in the cloud. We'll tackle that on another video because we don't want to go into it now, but it's a full IDE or integrated development environment. It makes it really easy to edit your code in the browser. You're not going to want to typically build code inline like we're doing now. You're going to want to set up a little more formal code practices, but for our purposes and dipping your toe in the water, this is really, really good. So you can see here our Lambda has a note to do, implement, aka do something. But when this executed, it had a return code, status 200. The body was dumping out a JSON object called hello from Lambda. Remember we saw that in our code? You can see it in the bottom in the execution results. We could also change that. We could say hello from the live stream. Don't know if live stream, if we've agreed on it being one word or two, but we're gonna run it that way, right? So now if I save this, and then if I run a test again, if we scroll back up to the top, you're gonna see that output has changed. Hello from the live stream. Yes, we've taken 12 minutes or so to create a hello world that's slightly more advanced. But if we scroll down to our code, we now have the ability to look at what's happening. So if we say print, which is going to then print out all of our event information, we're going to use another function. This is called json.dumps. Now, dumps is dump to a string the event. And I think I've got that right off the top of my head. But basically what we're saying is print to the log the event that was passed to our function. Okay, I think that makes sense. Print to the log, the event was passed to our function. We're going to save it. We're going to test it again. We're going to scroll to the top, and we're going to see that it succeeded again. But if you look at our log output, here is our test event. Fancy. So what has happened is that we have dumped the event that has been passed to our AWS Lambda function. We know now our test event sends that JSON document. We have access to it. We can dump it. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to dive into the records object. So we are coming back to our Python code. We're going to get a little more complicated. I'm going to walk you through this. I'm going to talk it through myself out loud because I literally have nothing planned. This is all sort of off the cuff. So again, may make mistakes. Let me know in the comments. So we are going to double check. We're going to say if records in event. So we're going to make sure that the key records is in the event. We know it is, but we're just going to make sure because in coding, you never want to assume, you want to verify. So if that is there, what we're going to do is say for each record in event records, print record. Print, this is a new record. Okay, let's remove this line. We're going to comment in Python. An octothorpe, aka hashtag or number sign, is a single line comment. So what we've got here is if the key records is in event. Okay, so we're checking to make sure there's records in this event. For each record in that collection of records, print this is a new record. And then print the contents of that record. Makes sense, right? We're going to save. We're going to cross our fingers and hope it works. This is the glamour of development, by the way. Tiny steps, try, see if it works. If we, oh, perfect. We can look right here. We don't even need to scroll back up. So if we look down in our execution, you will see the execution results. This is a new record. Okay, so we are down onto line 7 in our loop where we've actually accessed each record. And it's then printing the entirety of that record. So if we scroll over a little bit, we see all of those parameters earlier. So what we want is we don't want to deal with most of those. We want to look for the S3 key, and then under S3, we want to find bucket and name. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to say if S3 in record. So does the key S3 work in record? Okay. Then if bucket in record, so if that S3 key has a bucket key, then if name, and yeah, you need to check all these just to make sure, in record S3, oops, forgot that up here, S3, bucket, print, S3 bucket, format, and then I'm going to copy because I'm getting lazy. Okay, we added some complexity here. Okay, we got 8 minutes left. We added some complexity, not a problem. What we have is checking for each new record, is the key S3 in that record? Is the key bucket under the key S3? Is the key name under the keys S3 and bucket, right? So we've tested our data structure to go down to see if this value that I've highlighted with my mouse exists. If it does exist, we are going to print out S3 bucket, and then this is a placeholder for everything after format. So in other words, we're going to take the name and print it out. So we're going to have, ideally, in our output, we're going to have this is a new record, and then under that, S3 bucket record. I'm going to add 3 little dots so we know it. And then after that, we're going to go after the object and key. Okay, so let's just keep that in mind. We're going to save it. We're going to test it. And what you'll see out here is this is a new record, S3 bucket example bucket. So if we do the same thing back here, if we say if object in record, helps if I can spell, especially with 7 minutes left, record, if key in record S3, object, print S3 key. So we're doing the exact same format. Only difference is we're looking at a different object into object key. And Augusto's got a fantastic question. I'm going to tackle that in 1 second once we do this. So if I haven't mistyped anything, if I click save and I run test, you'll see now we have our bucket name and our key name. We've successfully pulled these out. So what we're going to do is back in our higher up in our function, what we want to do is create 2 variables. We're going to create a variable called key. We're going to make sure that's empty. We're going to make a variable called bucket, and we're going to keep that empty. And what we're going to do is assign the values to those variables. Okay, very, very simple here. The reason why we've created a variable that's a placeholder or a little piece of storage that we can write to is because instead of each of these loops, what we're going to do is add down here at the end, we're going to ignore the print record. In our return code, we are going to actually write something instead of hello from the live stream. We're going to say new object in S3 bucket called, so I've done 2 placeholders here, and we're going to say bucket and key. So what's going to happen now, if I save and I test this, you're going to see that the response status code 200, this has been successful. We have a new object in an S3 bucket, example bucket called test key. So what we've done is taken the complex document that S3 sends out saying there's a new bucket, there's a new object or a new put request, and we've ripped out the information we want, which is the name of the bucket and the name of the key, so that we can do something with that. We're going to do something with it, maybe squeak it in with 5 minutes. But Augusto's got a fantastic question on the stream here, and that is simply, what's the cost of this? Right? Are there limitations? Am I using the same Lambda function across the regions? That kind of thing. So a lot of questions rolled up into one question, which I love. We have run this function 5 or 6 times already. Let me just run it again for fun. Lambda pricing varies, but right now we're using the smallest Lambda type. So you give Lambda the amount of memory you want and how long you'll allow your function to run. Right now we're using the 2 minimum defaults because it's minimal code. This bills in collections of 1 million executions. We've done 6. It is 20 cents US per million executions in this region we're in US East 1. 20 cents per million executions. Negligible cost, right? You pay for other other AWS resources, but Lambda itself, very, very minimal cost. This function is only in the region we have put it in. You can call it from other regions if you set up the permissions correctly, or you can copy this function into other regions so it will execute locally. That doesn't have an impact on cost and timing and things like that. But Lambda, like most other AWS services, is regionally based. So right now you can see in the top right, we're in North Virginia. And that's meaning that that's all we've got here, right? So that's fine. As far as security, like we said, the big two things here are the admin role, which is who can access this function and write this code, and the execution role. What ability does this have to access AWS resources? So what we've done in today's quick tutorial is created a code that interprets S3 input functionality, right? So what we're going to show you real quick, because we've got 3 minutes, is how this actually works with a trigger. Why not, right? So let me go to services, and I'm going to open up S3 in a new console or in a new window here. I'll increase the font size so you can see it. I'm going to create a new bucket, which is road to reinvent. Road to reinvent. I'm going to click next. I'll keep the defaults. That's fine. Block all public access. Please use this all the time, unless you're hosting a website. I'm going to block all public access. I love that version. I love that default now. Create the bucket. Okay, create it. There we go. So now we have road to reinvent as a bucket. I'm going to flip back into the tab for our function. I'm going to close the service dropdown. We're going to add a trigger now, okay? Because we have a code that takes an S3 put request and spits out to logs some information, and it returns the results of the name of the bucket and the name of the key. So we add trigger, drop down back to S3 at the bottom, okay? Select our bucket, road to reinvent. On all object create events, sure, why not? No prefix, no suffix. So anytime anyone puts an object in our bucket, this is going to trigger our Lambda. Click the orange add button. It's going to take just a second. And you will see now at the top, road to reinvent was successfully, the trigger road to reinvent was successfully added. This function is now receiving events from this trigger. Let's try it. Why not? Let's try it. Let's go to our bucket. We're going to upload something. I'm going to drag and drop an image very simply. It's just a screenshot. Go to click next. I don't need any additional permissions, just me as the owner, because this is going to trigger in the background. Fine, I'll take normal tiering. So I'm paying to store this object. It's fractional cost because it's only 168 kilobytes. But if I go back to my Lambda function, I'm going to introduce a new section of Lambda to you too, which is great. We're going to click on the monitoring link here. So under the name of our function, monitoring, you're going to see CloudWatch metrics, which are glorious that we've basically done nothing. We've just started playing around essentially, which is fine. You'll start to see more and more here in duration because you're billed on duration. So how long the function runs ties to how much cost you have. But again, Lambda costs are fractional. They are so small. But what we're going to do is we're going to view the logs in CloudWatch logs. So we click here. This opens a new tab for CloudWatch logs, gives us our latest event stream. Hopefully things have shown up here. CloudWatch logs is a little bit delayed. If we click on the button, you're going to see we still have our tests, right? This is a new record. Those are the ones we ran manually, but I didn't know if you get the eyebrow raise on the bottom. I like when things work. This is a new record. Bucket, road to reinvent. Key, the name of the file we dropped there. Now we have successfully, with 15 seconds left, we successfully created an AWS Lambda function. Let me go back to the code. We successfully created a function that was triggered anytime anyone puts a file in an S3 bucket. It runs our code, which basically says what file was pushed there. It's a really, really simple example, but I think in the time we had today, that explains the concept, right? You guys had some great questions on the stream. This is the second time we've done this road to reinvent. I'm still working on the schedule, which I will make public so that it's not just random you're on LinkedIn when you see this pop up. I'm going to make it a little more regular to make it easy. But this is the core of a lot of patterns around automation in the cloud, whether they're security automations or other types. It's really simple to get started. It took us 30 minutes of stumbling around to write some code that is reacting to things that happen in S3. It's really that simple. Okay, you can expand this pattern to a number of things, but this is at its core. From a cost perspective, which is a fantastic question, thank you, Augusto. Costing is fractional. It's, you can play around with this as an individual for weeks, and maybe it's going to cost you $5. Okay, and that's a ridiculous amount of usage, like a ridiculous amount of usage. Obviously, you pay for other AWS items, But this is a very simple example. We stitched it together. We're going to expand on this, I think, in the future. We're going to tackle other services in the same way, but I thought it was really critical we start with Lambda, because you're going to see it pop up again and again, and hopefully this made it a little less intimidating. I hope this has been useful. Let me just switch back to my cam. I hope this has been useful. I hope this has been educational for you. I hope maybe generating more questions. If you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, hit me up in the description or in the comments down below. I will respond. And all the feedback I'm incorporating into building out this program leading up to reInvent. Like I said, I believe it's 71 days left. There's a lot of stuff you can learn so that when you hit the ground in reInvent, you are already up to speed on some stuff. So again, I have written the ultimate guide to AWS reInvent that's published online. I'll put the link in the description and in the comments so you can read that about the actual event itself. But we're going to be doing these live streams pretty regularly, working up to the event so that we're all a little familiar with each other, that we've all learned a little bit, and hopefully have a better understanding of how to build some cool stuff in the AWS cloud. I think it's really fun. I think it opens up a lot of possibilities. As always, hit me up with suggestions of what you want to see. I'm not afraid to tackle anything. I will fail. But hopefully we'll learn something about that failure. And I think that's really important to realize that none of this stuff goes really smooth out of the gate when you're stumbling around, but that's part of the way you learn, right? Or at least part of the way I learn. So thanks for joining me on this Friday. I hope you are set up for a fantastic rest of the day and a wonderful, wonderful weekend. I will talk to you online, and we'll see you on the stream next week.